today's show, we are taking a look at some of the most athletic players in the NFL draft. And why is this important? Why do we look at relative athletic score? Well, we brought on the man himself, Kent Lee Platte, aka Math Bomb, over on Twitter to talk about RAS, relative athletic score. And Dave, this has been something that we've been using forever and ever. And actually, it's been in the Football Guys rookie guide for quite some time now.
Yeah, we've been using it for, I want to say this is the fourth year now that Kent has been nice enough to let us use this data. And, I was just thinking about it last week. Like, we throw around relative athletic score and RAS on this show all the time. And it's just another one of those metrics that people might not be familiar with. So rather than us doing our best to explain how we use it, I figured, why not go to the source himself? We'll bring Kent on the show and he can tell us all about it. So Kent, relative athletic score, we, like I said, have it in the rookie guide, talk about it on the show. 0 to 10 makes it nice and easy to follow, but we'll get more into the methodology and how it's used later. But first things first, how did you come up with the idea for this? Because it seems like something that, I don't want to say simple, but, it's kind of shocking that you were able to come up with something like this that is so easy to understand. So how did you come up with this?
So I've been interested in it in some time, but I really started it in earnest around 2013. That was when I really started to put pen to paper, so to speak. It was the Le'Veon Bell draft, and we have we talk about superlatives every year, those terms that we use. And the big thing that year was that Le'Veon Bell is not athletic enough to get drafted in the first round. He's not athletic enough to succeed in the NFL. And it all rotated around the fact that he ran a 4.6 in the 40. But for his size, that was fine. That's a perfectly acceptable time. And the rest of his testing was really good. He had a bunch of really good testing. And for even before you look at the fact that he was a bigger back. So the fact that he was getting called unathletic just kind of irked me, and I'd already been thinking about doing something for a while. So I decided to figure out a way to add some context to the way that we look at testing to make it more accessible to people, because I enjoy the combine and I always have. And I just wanted to share some of that with people, and making it easier to access and easier to understand, I think, has really helped with that.
Yeah, and I do love that that's kind of your story, because we've talked about other tools and metrics that have popped up, and everybody, it seems to be like a common narrative that just annoys people so much that they say, I'm going to come up with a tool to just stop this. I don't know if you're familiar with Coach Speak Index. We've talked to them before, and this started because, I don't know if you remember, Joe Mixon like 4 years ago had this foot injury that was lingering, and Zach Taylor just kept saying like, oh, he's day to day, he's week to week, he's day to day, and we never really got a clear answer until they shut the season down. And he just said, that drove me so nuts that I needed to index how these coaches talk and what we can take for truth and what we can't. So love the origin story there.
Yeah, it's always starts out as just things are hard and I wanted to make it easier.
And you know what I love, it's something that you said here, was putting context to players, right, to their athleticism, because I think we can do as much as we want looking at film or looking at the analytics of it all, and really having this number that's almost semi-predictive of how a player can do in the NFL. It's so intriguing, and I want to know, Kent, how have you seen this number, the RAS score, be predictive of future production for an NFL player? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people that are just hearing about it for the first time, and they're like, well, why do I care about this? Is everyone actually really good in the NFL when they have a high score?
No, and the thing to really understand is that the fail rate from college to pro is incredibly high. It's higher than you think that it is. We were talking earlier, but this is the largest draft class that we've ever had. And about 90% of the players in this draft class will never see an NFL training camp. Not just an NFL field, an NFL training camp. 90% are never even going to see that. About 10% of players in a normal year get drafted from the draft class. And that's not a lot. And most people who get drafted don't find NFL success either. It's a small percentage of draftees who get their opportunity and find a sustained NFL success. And that's a really small percentage of prospects. And it's usually the same guys year to year too. It doesn't carry over. You still got guys to come in. So the fail rate's really high. So what you're looking for is anything that can give you an edge. And there's no magic number. If anybody ever tells you that a stat is going to directly correlate to NFL success, they're lying. RAS does not directly correlate to NFL success. There's the soundbite for the haters. They can have that one. But the trick is finding things that help. And the way that we do that for this high of a fail rate is to put things into what's called stratified analysis, which is putting things into buckets, right? And for RAS, we already do that with the color coding. We have the red, yellow, and green. We have the lower 50%, the highest 20%, and the guys in the middle. And then we look at a success metric, something like yardage or touchdowns or starts or something like that. I often use Pro Bowls, not because Pro Bowls is a great indicator, but because it's easy to verify, and it almost perfectly matches up with any other success metric that I've used. And when you start to look at those most successful players, you find out that about half of the successful players are in that top 20% of athletes. So if more than half of them are in that top 20%, that's a big difference in the amount of distribution there. So that's a significant correlation. And then you look at the guys that are in that bottom 50, the lowest half of athletic testers, and they only make up between 15 and 20% of the actual successful players in the NFL. A huge difference going from 50% of total players and only 15% of the successful players. So it gives you that idea of what your chances are, your likelihood of finding success. But it doesn't guarantee anything. If you have a guy who has no tape, he's never played football before, but he tested really well, that doesn't suddenly make him a good football player. There's a lot of other things that go into it. There's athletic testing and tape and character and all that other things. Athletic testing is one part of it, and it should only ever be treated like a part of an evaluation.
Yeah, and I love that you went with Pro Bowls. I mean, it's so tough to kind of define NFL success. And last year, I did a huge study on draft capital and how draft capital can impact and be correlated by, success, basically. And a Pro Bowl appearance was one of the metrics that I used as well, because you can kind of make these arbitrary lines for what's successful or not. I was looking at quarterbacks and I did 4,000 yard seasons and 30 touchdown seasons and 80 plus starts, but one of those was a Pro Bowl. And we also saw a direct correlation between higher players drafted, the more likely they are to make a Pro Bowl in their career. So looking at relative athletic score, there have been a lot of other studies about how some drills correlate more than others. So, an example that I talk about often is, I'm really looking at 3-cone and shuttle drills for running backs because those are the ones that have the most correlation to success. And you talked about at the top of the show back in 2012, 2013, everyone was so enamored by the 40 time, which we've realized probably isn't quite as important as some of these other drills. So how is it that you use all of these different drills, putting them into relative athletic score? Do you weigh them evenly, or do you try to weigh differently by position?
So with the scoring, everything is weighed evenly. I said before, everything was trying to make everything simple and understandable. If we tried to add some kind of complexity where we weight things differently by position, that's complexity that I have to then explain, which makes it less accessible as a metric. So I don't do that for the base scoring. But whenever you're looking at whether a player is going to find success, it's important to pay attention to what they do on the field and what they're good at and what you expect them to do in the NFL. There's a lot of stuff that we can do, like the cone for pass rushers, shuttle for offensive linemen, explosive drills for power rushers and things like that. There's some specifics that we can get into, but because of typing in the NFL, it doesn't necessarily go across the board. Looking at pass rushers, we always want to look at that 3-cone. Oh, he's got a great 3-cone. He's got that bend. Not every pass rusher wins that way. Von Miller is the prototype for that type of passer. If you want a guy that's going to bend, look for a guy with a great 3-cone, compare him to Von Miller. That's the best you're going to find at doing it. And he had a very, very good 3-cone. So when you have a guy with a good 3-cone, it's an easy comparison to make. But that's not how Myles Garrett wins. And you don't want to compare those two because they're very different players. They still win. They just do so in a different way. It's a lot easier to see in wide receivers. Calvin Johnson is a fantastic receiver and was one of the best to ever play the game. Wes Welker was also an extremely good receiver for a really long time, but those are very different players. They play a completely different breed of football. So it's important to pay attention to what guys are doing when you look at what traits they have and how you think that's going to translate. It's never going to be across the board.
You've mentioned some really big names from fantasy production to Pro Bowls, to all pros. I mean, talking about Le'Veon Bell and various other wide receivers that you've mentioned here. Have you seen any athletic standouts from this class? Guys that when you got their scores, not only were you surprised at how high the scores were, but you went, man, this is really indicative of a player who should find success at the next level. Now, I know you've already said it's not the end all be all, but this is it's another one of these metrics that are getting us closer to cracking the code. I don't think we ever quite will have anything perfect, that perfect pill that fixes it all. But who were some of the players that really stood out to you?
Yeah, we had two big ones from the Combine, which was Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M and Nick Emanwari from South Carolina. And they're very different case studies for how you weigh that athleticism. because Nick Emenware was already considered one of the top safeties in the class, the top safety by a lot of people. So the fact that he tested incredibly well wasn't really a surprise. But he didn't just test incredibly well. He tested better than any safety ever, and any corner, and any free safety ever, and almost better than every linebacker ever. He's an incredibly gifted athlete. And when you're trying to project that to the next level, you already have a guy whose tape is really good. You already have a guy who's considered a reliable player. And then you have that athletic profile to boot. That's money for an evaluator, right? And then you have Shamar Stewart, who he does have some good tape, and he was considered a first rounder by a lot of people, but maybe not a top tier guy. But he had the best RAS that we've ever had from a pass rusher. He's right up there with Mario Williams and Kyle Vanden Bosch and Von Miller and Sean Merriman and all those other guys that are up there at that top tier. But he doesn't have that college production. He only had 4.5 sacks over 3 years. Not a lot of production there. So we've got two different players with very different aspects of their game being scrutinized, but they both ended up with that top tier athletic score, which is going to help both of them when it comes to the draft time. It's just a matter of how much you weigh that versus the other factors.
Yeah, and I think Shamar Stewart is a great example of somebody who really improved his draft stock at the combine. He was regularly kind of a day 2 pick, and now in my most recent mock, I had him going at the top half of the first round to Atlanta. I mean, teams want to chase after this athleticism, and you can teach a lot of talent and skills and things like that, but athleticism isn't something you can teach, so people do like those raw skills. Now, something that I noticed is that two of the top tackles in this class, Will Campbell and Armand Membu, are two of the guys that are really showing out with relative athletic score this year. I'm looking right now. Will Campbell, 9.91 out of 10. Armand Membu, 9.90 out of 10. So talk to me a little bit about that. Are there some positions that might correlate more to RAS and career production? And is that maybe on the offensive line?
Yeah, and it's kind of outside in, just like you'd really expect it to be. The guys on the outside, they have to face those really athletic pass rushers. Defensive end is one of those positions where athleticism tends to be a really big deal. That's why guys like Shamar Stewart tend to raise up in the draft when they test that well. But tackle is one of those positions where generally, broadly, you want those really athletic guys. We do have examples like Orlando Brown and Trent Brown, guys that don't have hardly any testing, but they're gigantic and have that massive wingspan. And they win in different ways. And I think it's important to listen to those types of players and the guys that evaluate them when you have successes like that. Because yes, athleticism is important, and yes, it tends to correlate to success. But when you have a guy that doesn't test well and still finds success, as an evaluator, your question should be why? Why is he having that success? Orlando Brown went into a very long-winded discussion about that. I think in his second or third year, you should look up interviews with him. He does a phenomenal job of explaining why he finds success despite not being this top-tier athlete. But tight end is a position where more than any other position, it's relying on athleticism. We've never had a first-round pick at tight end with a RAS below 5. We've only had one tight end get 750 yards receiving in a season with a below 5 RAS, and it was Jordan Reed one time. And he has a lot of asterisks with that because he was often injured. He barely qualified for RAS due to injury. He was close to 5 anyway when he did score. So there's a lot of asterisks there. We don't have examples like we do at running back and tackle and other things. Tight end is just one of those positions where you better be at least a good athlete to be able to find success, and it's much better to be an elite tier athlete.
Yeah, Jeff Bell and I have been talking about that quite a bit lately. It seems like George Kittle really kind of changed how teams look at tight ends now. He was one of the few guys that had off the charts athleticism, but still slid in the draft a little bit, and he blossomed into George Kittle. And it seems like NFL teams have said, we're not letting these hyper athletic guys fall in the draft anymore.
Nope. And we have like guys like Mike Gesicki, who, he's not a top tier producer every year, but he's had a strong career, and he's putting up 500 yards every year. That's perfectly fine. I will take that anytime. And that's what teams are finding, is that at the very least you get a contributor.
Right.
Now, you mentioned the tight end position, and I was going to try to use that as an example here, but why don't we open this up a little bit more to all the positions? Was there any prospect in this draft class that you saw the RAS score come through and you were just like, oof, that prospect almost has to be off draft boards at this point, or they were just a big faller during this pre-draft process? Who were some of the names that stood out to you there?
I don't think that anybody dropped off completely. There's one that might have, at least for some people. But we had Tyler Booker and Malachi Starks at the combine that didn't test very well. Tyler Booker is probably still going to go in the first round. I think he'd be the first sub-5 RAS player to get drafted in the first round in the 2020s. I think the last ones we had were in 2019. So that would be, it wouldn't surprise me if he still went in the first. He's got a lot of great tape, but it definitely hurt his draft stock. You rarely see him in the top 5, top 10 like we used to before. Malachi Starks was the other top safety along with Nick Emenwari. The fact that Emenwari did so great and Starks did so poorly, I think hurt his draft stock quite a bit. And you've seen him sliding down boards some. Still has a lot of great tape. I don't think I would write him off completely because of it. And then throughout the pro day circuit, we had Jared Ivey, who tested pretty poorly at was it Mississippi's pro day. That's not a top tier guy. He's a day 2 guy, might slide into day 3 because of that. He's got the size that I think he might still go in day 2. But I think the one that hurts the most from this is Restrepo. Restrepo ran a 4.86, I think it was, in the 40. He had really good agility drills, and people are going to point to that and say, yeah, he can still do the things that we want him to do. That might be true, but we've also never had a top producing wide receiver in the 4.8s. We've had a couple of 4.7 guys, not many, but some of them had injury concerns. We had Jarvis Landry, who had a hamstring injury before he tested at the combine and ran in the 4.7s. And then we have Anquan Bolden. He's in a category of his own. He doesn't play the same game of football as other receivers. We can't say that of Restrepo. He's a fairly typical slot receiver when it comes to style. I don't mean to diminish him as a player, just stylistically speaking. Will he be able to find success in that 4.8 range, or will that speed limit him in the pros? I think it could severely impact his draft stock, and I don't think anybody is going to be looking at him as a day 2 guy now.
I'm glad that you mentioned that about Jarvis Landry. I didn't realize the context behind his poor testing. Like, Landry was always one of those guys when he was in the league. Just loved him, and you could see that he had athleticism, whether it was the strength or the speed. And I know he's always kind of the guy that we talk about, having like the poor
Not
RAS.
just poor.
He is that outlier.
It's my favorite card.
Yeah.
0.27 out of 10.
Yeah, and you could watch him play and tell me that he is a 0.27 athleticism out of 10. No, not even close. So glad I got some context there, because I have wondered that for a long time, how that happened. So last question we got here, Kent, before we wrap up. How much would you say that RAS can affect draft stock? And, I ask this because Cecil Lammey, a long time, I think this was his 20th year going to the Senior Bowl, and he always says that the Senior Bowl can raise or lower draft stock by about 1 round. Would you say that's about what relative athletic score does, or do you think that maybe the athleticism weighs a little bit heavier than what somebody does on a random week in Mobile, Alabama?
I think getting a high enough score when you're not really expected to test that way can raise your draft stock, and it might be up to a round. I don't have any good examples of that. I mean, we've had some guys that tested really well in 1 or 2 drills. Was it Derek Brooks or whatever was drafted by the Seahawks a couple of years ago, had a really good 40, but he was injured. So he was like, I'm done. I had a good 40. I'm not going to test anymore. Ended up going in the first round. Nobody really expected him to be a first rounder. But I can't think of anybody that really had a huge jump. A lot of the guys that we've seen have maybe moved up half a round at most. Trevon Walker is going to be the big one that people bring up. He was already a pretty well thought of prospect, but definitely not a number 1 overall guy when he was getting talked about prior to his combine.
But now we're seeing that with Shamar Stewart. Like
Exactly.
I said, a lot of people had him as a day 2 pick, and now he's moving into round 1, moving into the top half of round 1. And who knows, by the time April 20, whatever the draft is, he might be a top 10 pick by then. I mean, he just keeps moving up because of that athleticism.
And this has worked with other guys. Like, this has worked with guys like Ziggy Ansah and Alden Smith.
Yep.
And like, there's just been names that ended up being really good in the NFL that were just looked at as just sheer athletes coming out of college.
Yeah, and I think in the other direction is where you really start to see movement, is when guys test poorly. I don't even think it's 1 round. It could be the entire draft if a guy tests poorly enough. The NFL is not a league that looks at that stuff and says, well, we're just going to go check the tape. They have guys who have been studying this tape extensively the entire time. And when a player tests poorly and it's a surprise to them, they don't like being surprised. They like things that are predictable. They like seeing a fast guy run fast, agile guy run quickly in his drills. They see the explosive guys. They want them to have the explosive in those drills. When they don't, those check marks go away. They're not going to just be like, well, we're going to fall back and trust the tape. Some guys do, but a lot of times it bites them. The Lions had Bob Quinn, who hooked all of his horses to a corner that ran in the 4.7s, and he kept saying, well, he had some of the best tape I've ever watched. Ended his career with 0 pass deflections, let alone interceptions. That's not going to go over well as an evaluator. Nobody's going to trust your evaluation if you say you've spent more time on this guy than anybody else, and you trust that over the athletic testing, and then he completely bombs out. People want to trust their evaluations, and when you get your evaluation put at risk by testing extremely poorly, that's why I mentioned Restrepo, because it's such an extreme case. It's not that he had a bad 40; it's that he had a really bad 40 that makes people question it. People don't like those extremes.
With Restrepo, he did come out after and say that he got injured and he played through an injury, and that's what we heard from Gunnar Helm as well. But Gunnar Helm
had pictures.
More believable
we've seen that.
We saw Gunnar Helm.
I in no way want to diminish injuries. Players get injured all the time. The hamstring injuries very much impact your ability to test. It's one of those injuries that may not be a long-lasting injury, but it's definitely a limiting injury. My thing is, if you say that you did that after you test poorly, I'm going to be skeptical of it. It's the dog ate my homework of injuries.
Yes.
And I don't want to sit here. I'm not calling Restrepo a liar or anything like that, but I think that skepticism is warranted when you have a pro day where they documented, it was 8 different players had documented injuries from the pro day, and his didn't. His had no notes next to it for injury. It just said that I think he skipped a couple drills by choice, which players do that all the time. That's not a big deal.
Yeah.
But it didn't have any notes of the injury. And if he did, why wouldn't he have said something about it when his teammates had done so? So it's concerning to me as a person who's just done this specific thing for over a decade when I hear that after a guy tests poorly. But I mean, it is what it is. If he is hurt, that would be a limiting injury.
And I totally get the after the fact. I mean, I know if I'm at the gym and I can't finish a set, all of a sudden I'm feeling that in my shoulder. Something's not right there, and make sure everybody sees that it was a shoulder injury, not just weakness that caused me to crap out there. Well, Kent, want to thank you so much, man. This was awesome. Really appreciate you making the time today. Before we sign off, can you just let everyone know where they can find Relative Athletic Score, the website, what you've got coming out between now and the draft, how many players you have going on, social media, all that good stuff. The floor is yours.
You can find all of my work up at RAS.Football, RAS.Football. It's all free. You can go on there and look up any player from the last almost 40 years now. We have almost 30,000 players in the database. Almost 2,500. Actually, I think we're over 2,500 from this draft class alone. I said before, this is the largest draft class that we've ever had by a pretty wide margin. We're almost 500 players larger than the second largest class that we've ever had. All of that information is up for free on my website. You can go look it up now. You can find me on Twitter at MathBomb. I'll be posting every player that scored a 5 or above or is in our Pro Football Network Top 150. I run the mock draft simulator over there, so I use our own rankings. I'll be posting every player that I have in the database. It's a lot. Every 5 minutes during the day, starting at 8 o'clock and going until I run out of players to post. I'll be doing that between now and the draft. I'll be doing a bunch of stuff where I look at the different types of success metrics that I have tracked and how those have shown to correlation. I'll be doing some of that between now and the draft. And then, of course, day of, I'll be covering every single pick and posting their cards with their brand new shiny team colors on it. So you can go out and get your nice team colors on your players as you get them.
Well, Kent, man, this has been awesome. I want to thank you for coming on. I think you got us one step closer to figuring out the NFL draft and these prospects here. Hopefully, everybody that's either watching or listening back at home, you guys learned a little something today. Kent, thank you so much for joining us, man. All right, so we had a really good conversation with Kent. We got to learn a little bit more about RAS score and why it matters for these athletes. And like we said, we're not going to ever get to the breaking the Da Vinci Code of the NFL draft and figuring out these prospects. But what I think this does do is it's either going to A, confirm our priors, or B, make us go back to the film and say, wow, I didn't realize this guy was this fast or this athletic or jumped this high, or this guy is really that slow. So Dave, what we want to do here is we're just going to talk about some players that we think really rose in this pre-draft process because of their athletic score, guys that just stand out above the rest. So I know you got a couple of names here. Why don't you start off with your first one?
Quinshon Judkins was a guy who prior to the combine, the biggest knock against Quinshon Judkins was, well, is he athletic enough to play in the NFL? And now, with the benefit of hindsight and seeing what he did at the combine, we could say, yeah, he absolutely is athletic enough. The reality is that the way he was deployed at Ohio State, he was getting the early down touches between the tackles where he didn't have an opportunity to showcase his speed. The one time that we did see him break away on a big stage was in the national championship game when he was gassed and he got caught chased down from behind. So I think because of that, a lot of people thought that he didn't have the required athleticism for the NFL. Well, he came out of the combine and logged a 9.90 out of 10 relative athletic score, best among all running backs in this class. So he was a guy that, going into the combine, I had right alongside Caleb Johnson, and I wasn't really sure who I preferred between the two. But Quinshon Judkins is clearly ahead of Caleb Johnson now, who I do have to say, once you adjust for size, also had a decent combine himself. But for a guy who had questionable athleticism to come out and prove on paper that he is the most athletic running back in the class, it would be foolish to do anything but move him up in your rankings.
And it's kind of crazy because this is the guy that I watched the film and I said, man, he doesn't get to that top end speed almost ever on film, but the acceleration so sorry, actually I reversed that. You don't always see the acceleration. Wait, no, I'm reversing that again. Back one more time. You do see the acceleration. Sorry, man. Yes. I've been moving for days here. You do see the acceleration.
You got punched in the eye as well, it looks like.
No, man. Okay. All right. Quick moment.
Sorry, I didn't want to bring it up and embarrass you in front of Ken, but I'm seeing a little shiner there.
Yeah, quick moment. I was moving this like clothing rack that my wife has, and it's just like steel rods, and it's about like 25, 30 pounds, and the pieces came apart and one piece fell on my eye. So yeah, that's it. So yeah, comments, have at it. But
tough.
No, I don't. I really don't. But anyways, the Quinshon Judkins thing, man, it's just like Quinshon. So typically what you see with a lot of guys like this is that they take time to build their speed, but you just didn't see that happen all the time at Ohio State for him. But you did see that burst coming through the blocks, coming through the line of scrimmage. And this is one of those guys, man. Like, I think that the relative athletic score, the combine, it all proves that he can not only just be a 3-down back, but he can make explosive plays for teams, especially in the right blocking schemes too. I think that teams did tend to load the box a little bit more when Judkins was on the field versus Travion Henderson.
Let's hear about your guy, Alfredo, a guy with a real nice RAS.
Oh boy, huge RAS, biggest RAS, actually second biggest RAS from his team. Emeka Egbuka, wide receiver for Ohio State. And this was a guy I really liked already. And I believe I've got him over at my wide receiver 3 now in this class. And a lot of it initially had to do with he does all the tough things that you like. He can block in the run game. He can move inside or outside. He is a very quality route runner. And that's a big thing for me is route running, spatial awareness. Can you be the chess piece that is on the right place of the board for your quarterback? And we've seen him do this with multiple quarterbacks through multiple years, breakout as a sophomore. The only thing for me that was still sitting there of like, does he have it, is the relative athletic score. Now, a lot of people tend to just look at the 40 time, and the 40 time, man, he just barely made it. 4.49, where it looks good. But what I really liked was seeing the shuttle, where he got a 4.15, which is good, very good actually. And then the vertical, where he jumped, what did he jump here? 38. I mean, You're seeing a guy who has very good, that's how it's qualified here on the RAS scorecard. Very good explosion, very good agility. Now, he didn't do all of the drills, so it does not qualify completely. But his unofficial RAS score over here of a 9.27 on the website is actually pretty surprising because that's not what I thought we were going to see. I saw more of a Keenan Allen type who's going to win you with the slow plays. And no, he's good in tight spaces. He's got explosion. This is a player that I am way more in on than I was. Not that he moved up too much for me, but I definitely see him now as an easy top 20 pick, in this draft class. And someone getting that kind of draft capital, his sort of position, he's going to have a lot of fantasy relevance, especially in his first year.
Yeah, I've had Egbuka ahead of Burden for quite a while now as my wide receiver 2 in this class. And I think that we're just doing that thing that we do this time of year where we overthink. The biggest knock I've heard against Emeka Egbuka is, well, he's just too good of a football player to be good in fantasy. He blocks and he does these other things.
Okay, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, but that's a real thing, and I mean, like, this is the Amon-Ra St. Brown trajectory. Like,
Right.
this is how Amon-Ra St. Brown, a day 3 pick, was able to get on the field consistently, was doing the things besides running routes and catching balls. He was blocking, he was doing, the things that other receivers don't wanna do out of the slot, and then he became their full-time primary receiver. It's so easy to envision a world where Emeka Egbuka does the same thing. I mean, he is a great athlete, a great route runner, he's good after the catch, and then he does the things that a lot of other receivers don't like to do when it comes to blocking and sealing the edge. So I'm completely with you. I love Egbuka. I've been drafting him or mocking him in my last 2 mock drafts to Baltimore because I think it would make a lot of sense for them to put Egbuka in the slot where they could move Zay Flowers out wide. But at this point, I don't know if he's going to slide that far. Like you said, he should be a top 20 pick in this draft, and it would be great if he lands with Baltimore, but I just don't know if he's going to make it that far into the first anymore.
I mean, hey, there's a lot of there's a lot of good spots for him. I still think we could end up seeing him on the Houston Texans at pick 25. So I don't think he could end up in Baltimore. I think even though they did add DK Metcalf 21 Steelers, if they go
Yeah.
out and sign Aaron Rodgers and they still get Egbuka at 21, they're stacked. The Broncos at 20. Like there's just so many spots. Okay, anyways, next one on here, Dave, give us your next guy.
This is a guy that I've liked for a long time, and I was so excited when he checked a 9.75 RAS at the combine. Jaylen Noel out of Iowa State. And he did what's kind of hard to do. When you look at relative athletic score, they do weigh height and weight in there, and he came in 5'10, 194 pounds, which are both graded as poor. But he came out with elite grades in speed, elite grades in explosion, and great grades in agility. So this is a guy that might be relegated to slot work early in his career, but is just such a good athlete. And you'd see that consistently. If you watch what he did at Iowa State, he had so many big plays after the catch where he had the strength to shake off defenders and the speed to break away in the secondary. So he is a guy that I saw the athleticism, and I don't want to double count it because he was able to log elite athletic measurables at the combine as well, but just a really good player who has been rising up a lot of draft boards. I think he could end up being an early round 2 pick, even with some of the size concerns.
Yeah, he's one of those guys. I keep bringing it up every time we talk about him. That when I turned on the film, I had to double check what the playback setting was on because I thought it was up to like a 1.25 the way he runs. And
Mhm.
listen, he's small, like SHMOL. Like he just is. Like that's it. We have to learn to get over that stuff because he's not just small and frail. He's a thick boy. Okay, he reminds me a lot of like a Christian Kirk, but with just incredible explosive athletic ability here. And I think he'll probably be limited just to the slot, but there are so many teams that are looking for a guy like this that can just be an explosive playmaker consistently. And a lot of these slot guys, we're starting to see them age out a little bit. I know Stephon Diggs just signed with the
Mhm.
Patriots, but Diggs, Cup, a lot of these older guys, there's openings in the league for a guy like Jaylen Noel.
And I think Jaylen Noel, early in his career especially, will be relegated to slot work. But with that speed and with that explosion, if he can just add a little bit of nuance to his route running, then you can put him out wide. And then he's got the big play upside as well. Just a player I really, really like. He's been moving up my rankings quite a bit. I don't know where you've got him, Alfredo, but I've got him as my wide receiver 7. And if he gets that early round 2 draft capital, I might be able to bump him up even a little bit higher.
Yeah, I think he's around there for me. I still have some of the other guys that to me are like that prototype where I think the ceiling's a little bit higher. I do have them ahead of him. But I'm going to go to another guy here, and it's Mason Taylor, tight end out of LSU,
Oh,
who listen, originally I had him as my tight end 4. I have moved him up to tight end 3 at this point, and I think he's every bit as good as a Colston Loveland. They're different players, so don't get me wrong. But I think that from an NFL ready standpoint, I don't know if there's another. And by the way, I know this is going to sound crazy. This is including our Penn State tight end, Tyler Warren. I don't think that there is a more NFL ready tight end in this draft than Mason Taylor. Now, are there players with a much higher ceiling? Absolutely. Are there players that you have a juicier athletic ability? Absolutely. But Mason Taylor answered a bunch of the athletic questions that we had because he's 6'5, 251 pounds. And our biggest concern was, can he run? Well, damn it, he can. He ran a 4.68. He was in the 85th percentile for players at his size. And this is Dave, everything that we talk about with tight ends is that they need to have athletic ability, and that's what we got here. Now, the only thing that he wasn't great at was the shuttle. Honestly, I don't want to see my tight end having to make little small movements in space. I want to see my
Yep.
6'5", 250-pound tight end. If he's got the ball in space, I want to see him running dudes over. That's all I want to see. If you're that big, don't be trying to juke anyone. Just push them into the dirt, honestly. Like, that's it. And with Mason Taylor, we know he's got the bloodlines. Jason Taylor's son. Yeah, I want to say, yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not his daughter.
Well, I thought maybe nephew. Okay, give me a
It's his
moment
son.
here. Yes, yeah, I'm just trying to remember that. But the production was there too, man. Like, and I know it was never really that big. Like, we didn't get the jarring numbers. Like the touchdowns, 3, 1, 2. It never really had the big numbers that jumped out to you. But you got to remember who he's been playing with over at LSU. Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors, another guy that I'm not going to talk about today, but Jack Besh, who I really wanted to talk about today. There have just been so many players on that team that there's just not enough football to go around. And LSU has not really been one of those teams that typically uses the tight end a whole bunch. But Mason Taylor, man, this to me, NFL pro ready guy, answered the athletic questions, and I think he goes early round 2, Dave.
I've got him as a late first round pick, and
Okay.
he's a guy who has been moving up for me a ton. The more I watch him, I mean, the relative athletic score is great, but what really jumped out to me were the drills at the combine when you saw him among his
So smooth.
peers running routes and the gauntlet, all of that. He just looks smoother, faster, and more polished than anybody else. And what really jumps out to me too is the age. He's still just 20 years old. I mean, like, this is going to be one of those guys that 5 years from now we're going to be talking about, like Mason Taylor, still just 25 years old. Can you believe it? I mean, he's kind of on that Kyle Pitts path where he's getting drafted at age 20. And that to me, I don't want to push back too hard on your analysis, but you said, he might not have the ceiling of some of the other guys. I think there's realistic possibility that at 20 years old, he could still grow. He could still put on a lot of weight. He can still get more athletic. I think
I'm
there
putting
is
on
room to
weight.
grow here. Yeah, I mean, it could. But he's just a guy that I really, really like. And with that late first round pick, a couple of the teams that I can see potentially taking him, San Francisco, Kansas City, teams that have an established aging tight end right now that wouldn't force him to immediately produce, where he can kind of sit back for a year or two, learn from a George Kittle, learn from a Travis Kelce, and then take over as that guy in the future. Mason Taylor, I'm just obsessed with this guy. The more I watch him, the more I like him.
Yeah, man, I'm really excited to see where he ends up because I don't think also his prototype, like he's not a guy that you bring in as a rotational player. He's a guy that's ready day one to go and start and play on every single down at tight end. Well, Dave, there's another tight end that I think you want to talk about, and this has been the guy that you've been jumping on the desk for, pounding the table for, whatever you want to say. Talk about him.
Yeah, Terrance Ferguson had the best relative athletic score of any tight end in this class. Really showed out at the combine. He had a 9.32 relative athletic score. Came in a bit thin at 247 pounds. That was the one knock against his profile, was his weight, but elite speed grades, elite explosion grades. And one of the things that jumped out to me that I know I've mentioned on this show before is that he averaged 9 yards after contact per attempt. I mean, when he got the ball at Oregon, he was just a freight train as soon as he would catch the ball, and he was tough to bring down, and he had a lot of big plays after the catch. That's what we've seen historically translates well to the NFL. Tight ends who are able to catch the ball while moving and make plays after the catch typically do so when they make it to the NFL. So Terrance Ferguson, I think a lot of people view him as more of one of these big slots, maybe like a Mike Gesicki type of guy who we just talked about with Kent. Maybe didn't have the huge ceiling, but a long, productive NFL career. Then I think in the right situation where he doesn't have intense target competition, we could see more production than we ever got from Mike Gesicki, but just a good athlete who checked those boxes, had a good efficiency profile in college, and has been a guy that I liked quite a bit even going into the combine. So it's been hard to move him up. But when we look at the top of this draft with Tyler Warren, Colston Loveland, and Mason Taylor, I think Terrance Ferguson, if not right up there with them, is very, very close behind.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the Mike Gesicki thing because that's exactly what I was going to say for Terrance Ferguson. And
Mhm.
there's a place in the NFL for guys like this. And I know you're a bit higher on Terrance Ferguson. He's what, your tight end 2?
Tight end 2, yeah.
Tight end
I've
2?
got,
Okay.
but, again, I do use draft capital as my guiding light, and these are rankings that I fleshed out months ago. And, if it works out the way that we expect it to, or Tyler Warren, Colson Loveland, and Mason Taylor are all day one picks, and then Terrance Ferguson falls to round 2, I'd have to move Loveland and Taylor ahead of Ferguson at that point.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's what's going to happen, but we'll wait and see how the draft plays out. Uh, there's another guy here that I think draft capital is going to mean a lot for him, especially at this position, because we've seen that at running back, draft capital matters. And Dave, I want to be the first one to welcome you to the RJ Harvey is really good at football club, because I see that you have now moved RJ Harvey up to your running back 6. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, baby. Well,
Mm-hmm.
welcome to the club. You know what? It's you, me, and Jeff Bell. We all have RJ Harvey as our running back 6. And this was a guy that just, you know how, you ever see the movie Inside Out, Dave? You know, the one with the emotion,
Yes.
the Pixar
Oh, yeah.
one?
Great
right?
one. Yeah, yeah.
That's the one with the core memories, right?
It is,
It's like,
yes.
okay. So core memory for me in this draft process was throwing on the film for RJ Harvey and just going, damn, he's fast. This dude
boy
is
can
just
move.
a play. Yeah, he's just a playmaker. He is absolutely. It's if there was like a, I know it's already taken by Jahmyr Gibbs with Sonic and Knuckles, but he absolutely, the way he runs reminds me of the Sonic video game, like the OG one on Sega, and he just kind of has everything that you look for. He's got the production, back-to-back years of over 1,400 yards. The touchdowns were insane. Dave, insane. 38 touchdowns in 2 years. That's just the rushing touchdowns, by the way. He's at 42 overall in 2 years, which is just nuts. Absolutely insane. And I think the only thing that people are going to look at here and say, well, we've got to see if he can do it in the NFL, is that he simply doesn't have the size. He's 5'8", 205, but I mean, he's a little pot roast, man. He is thickly built and he's incredibly fast. A 4.40 flat puts him at one of these guys that he can't be kept off the field at this point. He's got an incredible explosive grade, incredible speed grade, known as elite here on the RAS scorecard. And honestly, I don't think being 205 pounds at running back is a problem anymore. We have a bunch of guys that have been successful. I remember Jahmyr Gibbs. A bunch of people were losing their mind because Jahmyr Gibbs weighed in at 199 pounds. You remember that? Remember when he was too small?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
If he just had a rock in his pocket and was 200 pounds when he stepped on that scale, he'd have been a smash pick.
I mean, it's crazy. So, like, yes, RAS score and getting all these measurables in are so helpful for us. But sometimes we take it a little too far. RJ Harvey's one of these guys, man. I think he can go as high as round 3. I think it's probably more likely he goes in round 4 because of the size, but the production is there, the athletic score is there, and then Dave, the big thing is going to be, where does he land?
Yeah. And I'm so hesitant to say this because I don't want people to think I'm making a comp or that I'm trying to dog on somebody who doesn't deserve to be dogged on, but you look at height and weight, RJ Harvey and Ashton Jinty are the same size. So we're talking about Ashton Jinty as a locked and loaded top 5 pick. And then RJ Harvey, we're saying that he needs to fall to day 3 because he's small. I mean, they're 5 pounds is what Jinty has on RJ Harvey, and they're the same size. So I know that's been the big knock on him, but I think it's kind of silly when we have seen smaller backs, especially in recent memory, perform well. But here's what really jumps out to me, and I apologize to anybody who watches the show and the Dynasty show because I rattled off all these stats on Tuesday's episode, but I was looking. 31 FBS running backs had 200 plus carries last year. So that's the sample size that we're looking at, 31 running backs. RJ Harvey was second in yards per attempt, second in rushes of 10 plus yards, and second in rushes of 15 plus yards. Ashton Jinty was first in all of those categories. RJ Harvey was also third in touchdowns. He was fourth in breakaway run rate. He was fifth in overall yards. He was sixth in yards per route run, eighth in missed tackles, ninth in yards after contact per attempt. Every efficiency metric that you look at for RJ Harvey, he was crushing in, and he was doing that on a massive workload. So we saw the speed, we saw the explosiveness, but for him to go out and then put that on paper at the combine and check all of those elite boxes for relative athletic score, sign me up for some RJ Harvey. I mean, I've got him right behind Caleb Johnson right now, but you look at a guy with that sort of athleticism, that sort of college production, that is the exact profile I want to go after in my rookie drafts.
It sounds a lot like you're saying that RJ Harvey and Ashton Jinty are the same player.
That's exactly what I said, is that RJ Harvey should be a top 5 pick and Ginty should fall to day 3. Thank you, Alfredo, for summarizing everything that I said there.
Clip it, post it. That's the perfect bow to the show right there. Right there. RJ Harvey, top 10 pick over Ashton Ginty.
Yeah.
Dave,
I like to
your
think anybody who's
spice
been
knows no
watching our
bounds
show
at
for
this point.
years can. I hope people can understand the sarcasm, but I'm sure somebody will sound off in the replies. But hey, that's the game we play.
Probably not. Probably not. Dave, anyone else that you want to throw out here? Like any other players? There's a few guys that I really liked. I wanted to talk about Jack Besh today. I wanted to talk about Aronde Gadsden II. Those are just some other guys that had some big athleticism questions and like size questions and things like that. And I love their film, love their profile. Is there anyone else like on your mind that you think like, man, if the show was a little bit longer, I could talk a little bit more about them?
Best RAS in the QB class, Brady Cook. No, there's nobody else I want to talk about.
Come on. Tyler Shugg, by the way, real nice RAS, real good RAS. Yeah. Huge RAS. All right, I think we're done then. We're gonna wrap it up here. That's enough out of us. Enough rassing from us. I want to thank you guys for watching and listening all the way through. A big thanks to our special guest, Kent Lee Platte. Make sure you follow him over on any of the social media websites at MathBomb and check out his website, RAS.Football, where you can just look at all the different athletic profiles for people over basically the last like 25 years or more, I think, actually. And I want to remind everybody, go and check out the Football Guys Rookie Guide. We're going to continue to update this thing. We have the RAS score in there. We've got all the updates from the NFL Combine with our scouting reports, player comps, draft projections, everything. And then we're going to update that again after the NFL draft. So make sure you have that downloaded. Go check that out. And of course, if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, take a moment to leave us a 5-star review. It helps us out so much, and it makes sure that me and Dave don't lose our jobs. So as always, thanks for listening, everybody. For myself, for Dave, we'll see you next time. Adios.